I think everyone's had a chance to even briefly engage with the work a little bit. So I have a couple of questions, kind of looking at some of maybe the bigger, what we might call themes, some points of overlap, but of course interject as you see fit. And of course you do have your nourishing, sustaining friendship between you, so I'm sure there'll be lots of things I'll say that might spark something that you've talked about already before. But I thought we might begin with this idea of efficiency and inefficiency. Can everyone hear me, by the way? Yeah. So both of you have used the word inefficient when you're talking about your work. Sara, with your work, we might think about inefficiency in terms of time and materials, the amount of time it takes to make a given work, the type of materials you use toward a certain outcome or effect. And we could move into a broader conversation around anti-capitalism and ways of marking time or spending time that aren't focused on production and turnaround. Mollie, you've talked about your process being somewhat inefficient and that you spend a lot of time staring at the canvases as you're considering them or making them. And of course, you've had a prolonged experience with chronic pain, which totally reconfigures someone's relationship to these notions of efficiency or time or value for time. So I thought we might just start broadly by talking about this idea of inefficiency and maybe, again, more broadly, time and outcome in relation to making.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is something of huge interest to me, I suppose, because where it comes from. And I wrote in Handiwork about a lot about amateur craft and about model railways. And I read this wonderful book about the history and theory of amateur craft, and in that the author talked about how amateur craft, I think he was particularly talking about sort of model railways, things like paint by numbers, these kind of things started to come into prominence after the Industrial Revolution, when people were working fixed hours, in a very structured way, and doing boring jobs for the first time in large numbers, doing boring jobs, and so that they would then, I think it also, the more modern ones would be like post-Second World War, like maybe the 50s. But anyway, these pursuits came about as a way of protesting against the sort of capitalist use of time. So they were going to work every day and they were working very hard. And then when they knocked off, they just wanted to do something useless and frivolous. And of course, it's grown and grown since. So that sort of stuck in my head, I think. And for me, I work also as a writer, and kind of mainly as a writer, or at least writing is what I do for a living. As hilarious as that sounds. And so for me, though I initially went to art school and studied art, since writing has come to kind of dominate my practice, I've come to think of the other pursuits as useless in a way. And then I would feel bad about the waste of time and feel bad about the inefficient methods that I applied. And then at a certain point I started to think, well, maybe this is actually the point of it, that I need this, that it's okay to make useless things for no money. That it's a way of escaping the system and how it wants us to function.
Yeah. And something actually that I meant to mention to you over the last few days was, I don't know if anyone has read 5 Manifestos for the Beautiful World. I think it only came out in January, but it's one of the Alchemy lecture series, and it has this amazing introduction by Christina Sharp, and she kind of talks about exactly that, like ways of engaging with literary practices or visual art practices that allow us to break out of these inherited structures, oppressive structures, and that idea of uselessness and waste as being the very point.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting. I haven't read that.
It's gorgeous. I think you'd like it. Yeah. Mollie, do you want to pick up on anything?
I think in terms of inefficiency in my practice, when Sara and I first met and you started engaging with my work, I remember explaining, Sara was very interested in the process of painting because
I've never really painted.
Yeah, you never painted, and I was trying to explain my process of painting and how I didn't consider myself like a good painter, I suppose, or like I think I was explaining like a painting about a bird, and I was like, well, if I was a better painter, I would have thought about this in terms of I would have put this down first, and then I would have put this over this, and you know, I don't think about things in the way that a painter should think about them, and that frustrates me. But then Sara has brought to my attention, she's like, no, but that's what makes you you, and that's what makes your paintings interesting. So I think, I guess, I don't know if that's answering the question about inefficiency, but it's answering the question of how, like the friendship aspect of how you've sort of reassured me in my own practice.
No, well, what fascinated me was how inefficient you are as a painter. But it was that very, but that was also what intrigued me about the paintings, because, you know, I guess they're only inefficient perhaps in terms of like mark makings, but in fact, like Mollie is like constantly thinking about a painting, and because they live, when I first met you, in this small space with her constantly, I was fascinated by how, you know, she would put a bird in 1 week and then think about why the bird was there and what the bird was doing there for a week. Not doing nothing else, but doing other things, you know, and then go back to the bird and change it around. And actually with this series of paintings, like when I look at them now, I've seen like 10 different versions of these in photographs so for me it was like, I guess when I'm working, for me it's like mindless busy work in a way. It's about the process, and it's about ritual, whereas so it's in its way lacking in thought, whereas Mollie's paintings are kind of full of the consideration, the moving things around. So it's inefficient in a different way, but I don't think you would. I think that shows in those of them as well.
I think we could also think about inefficiency in terms of accumulation, you know, this idea of slow accretion and like slow gathering rather than like a single shot, a kind of flick of the wrist approach to making as well.
But that's something that I really appreciate as well. Like as time passes, and I've been a painter for a long time, and I mean, we live in a world that's sort of slowly, whatever, like the climate crisis and things. I don't want to be a painter who's churning out a lot and a lot of work. I want to be very cautious of what I am putting out, and I want to like care deeply about each object that I say, yes, this has value to me, and yes, I'm willing to put it on a wall, and I'll fight kind of to the end to say that this is something that is meaningful for me. And so that sort of, that caution, because, you know, mass production can happen even on an individual scale as an artist. And I want to be cautious of that, I think.
And you see, I don't have that because of writing.
Well,
with
writing,
it's mass produced.
Well, the end result, the production of it is kind of out of your control to a certain degree, however, about how you might practice it when you're at your desk. Something, it's kind of come up a little bit, and I just want to put a bit of shape on it so that we don't lose any resonance as the conversation goes on. But I wanted to ask you about collaboration and the nature of this collaborative component for this show, because obviously the collaboration takes root in this friendship that you have, but collaboration isn't typically how you work, or how you always work, or how you've worked in the past.
Never.
So so if you wanted to talk a little bit about just how it's inflected this body of work or this exhibition, and how maybe it's changed your thinking around making, even if it's only for this show.
I mean, it's fair to say that I mean, I have collaborated more on stuff, I guess, because I'm a bit more multidisciplinary. But with this body of work, I guess the collaboration has been that we've talked about it. Mollie, I guess, has more about our relationship in her work than my work, which is quite self-contained and has been.
There's a visual kind of cross-referencing, and that one of your handkerchiefs is in one of Mollie's paintings, things like that. And then there's the conversational cross-referencing that maybe is manifest in the work, but not as readily
but really
identifiable.
for Mollie, I think the collaboration has been.
I feel like I think I've.
This is your cue to like say nice things about me.
Yep, and I will.
Now, Mollie.
No, I will say I think that I've been more it's been more lopsided, our collaboration in the past. And now I've kind of been taking it on anyhow.
Yeah, this is actually why it's difficult to answer, because I've been writing about Mollie since 2022.
Yeah, well, tell us about
and it's my next book, but it's slightly, it's confusing in the sense that the book is about a previous body of work. So from like 2022 into 2023, I was writing about the last series of work that Mollie made that's exhibited now, or it was exhibited in the Butler Gallery, and that opened on January the 24th. And the book came about because I encountered some of Mollie's exhibitions in a group show, and I was intrigued by them, and I heard this story about her as this painter who lives in a cabin somewhere in West Cork. I also live in West Cork. And we subsequently made friends, and it was later on that you asked me to write a text. So like the text wasn't why we became friends, but I do quite a bit of this, as you do. Artists will ask me to write a text, and you go to their studio and you engage with their work, and sometimes you have lunch or coffee, and then I would write this essay that was nearly inevitably about driving there and what they gave me for lunch.
Yeah, it's very telling what they give you when you get there. Yeah,
I make good lunches.
But then when Mollie asked me, I was like, and I kind of like, it's gold to me, that kind of material.
Yeah.
They have like a pot plant in their bathroom, and I'm like, yes.
Yeah.
And I realized with Mollie, I'm like, I have loads of this material. I have like, a whole friendship's worth of material. And also Mollie like makes art about her lunch. So it's kind of, and about the environment that she lives in or her experiences. So I was like, this is going to be so easy to write. And then subsequently kept writing, and then decided it was going to be a book about this particular series of paintings and her development of it over a particular period of time.
Yeah.
So that book is called Opening Night, because it ends on opening night.
Yeah.
And it will be published next May. There's kind of been a huge delay, so it's not here, unfortunately. But what you're seeing is then, I guess, what came after. So it was like I'd spent this long period of time writing about Mollie, and then, Mollie's life kind of fell off a cliff in a way.
Yeah.
And I started supporting her in a different way. And this body of work is about that support. And not just me, but like the other people who supported you during that period.
Yeah, so, Sara, like the show opened, and opening at night, book, your writing kind of came to an end in a sense, or the content for the book came to an end. And then I sort of, essentially I entered this very icky dental saga that was just pretty much horrific. And I did end up about 5 months of back in the States, really struggling. And
With acute and chronic pain.
Yeah, acute and chronic pain, and it got like so complicated and so messy I can't even describe. And there are a few select people who really stuck by me, and I see this show as like one-liner is the visual love letters to the people who got me through, and so each painting is for these people. But essentially the bottom line though is that Sara was on the other side of the ocean, voice noting me every day, morning and night.
Motivational voice notes.
Yeah, literally saying, you will get back to painting. This will pass. Like there are things worth living for. Like we're gonna get through this. Like when's your next? I mean, like doing things that like you're not supposed to do. Like would you listen to this doctor's appointment for me? She was researching. There was points where it was like I was telling her the medications that I was trying, and she was Googling them because I wasn't allowed. And I mean, it was like we were friends in like the best of times and the worst of times. And she really knew me in a way that like no one else ever will, and doing things that I would have never expected. And so I think when I got back to painting, it's sort of like I guess
it's like the collaboration is almost invisible now that I come to think of it.
Yeah.
It's like the relationship that went on. We haven't touched each other's work, but the relationship that went on around it was some kind of breeding ground.
Yeah. Well, maybe we could talk a bit more, Mollie, about how when you were actually making, so the paintings come out of this prolonged experience of chronic pain, or they take root in a particular moment of that prolonged experience where you came back. You flew back. Was it from Utah that you ended up flying back from?
No, I was. I'm from North Dakota.
From North Dakota, and you stayed the night at Sarah's house, and we have an image of that evening. I wonder if you just talk a little bit more about the process of making the works and how, or maybe it's too pedestrian or too linear a question, but did you feel you were narrativizing, externalizing what had come to pass, like some kind of agency or something, having been so out of control of your body or not being able to wrest control back from the situation, and having all of these misdiagnoses and all of this conflicting information from the doctors to kind of, not to come out the other side of it, but just what the actual experience was of making work about it?
You know, I think it was just these sort of like, you get those like little flashbacks of like that time period, and like, you know, I look back and I'm looking, like, in particular, I guess this room is like the bedroom scene is like the bedroom that I was living in at the time, and that one's for Titch. That's a friend of mine who I talk to a lot in that bed. He lives in West Cork, and so it's for Titch, but it's also for Sara, because I talked to Sara in that bed a lot. That was where I would voice note her at night, and so I think it's like that was a very miserable space for me. But I think that these were, when I was telling Titch about this show, he's a Buddhist, and he was like, well, this is a very Buddhist thing of you to do. It's like an act of gratitude, Mollie. And I think that that's like what I'm trying to do, some sort of like reconciliation with like the whole experience. It's like just trying to like make sort of peace with it, like get on, and like it is a form of processing, I suppose. I don't know. I'm trying to think like,
well, they went like, it's kind of important that they weren't made at the time.
Yes.
They
Yeah.
were looking back, because everything she paints is memory. It's like a misremembered. Wonky version of reality.
And again, I think that sense of accruing and like the embellishments of memory kind of accumulating over time as well. And it actually, just as you're talking there about the spaces, I wanted to ask you both about the domestic, and I'm not sure to what extent it will land, but just because you both have this, there is this sort of domestic presence or undercurrent, if you like, not necessarily always as subject, but Mollie, as you said, you depicted some of these spaces, these domestic spaces where you spent a lot of time when you were in terrible pain, and, you know, receiving kind of care and nourishment in these spaces. And also, you know, when you're in chronic and acute pain, your relationship to your domestic spaces can alter, you know, what was comforting and familiar can start to feel asphyxiating, because, you know, you can't choose to leave the space per se. And then Sara, you said something the other day about your handkerchiefs and how the empty space at the center of them is where the domestic happens, where the function happens, where the object is rested, where you blow your nose. It's that voided center is where function occurs. And I was struck by the duality of that. And then I was thinking about Georges Perec's Species of Spaces, and how he talks about reading is not only reading, it's the thrum of the subway, it's the warm water of the bath. I'm misquoting him horribly. But, you know, this idea of like daily life kind of substantively inflecting the work. And I just wonder if
well, for me that is really, really big, because like I say, I'm fine art trained, and then after college I spent a very formative period in working in the Douglas Hyde Gallery. And this was like 15 years ago when John Hutchinson was director. And I was hugely influenced by the smaller space, Gallery 2, which would always have an exhibition of like ethnographic objects, tribal art, folk art, outsider art. And that made the bigger impact on me, I suppose, having initially been caught up in the contemporary art world. And what I do now, I feel like it's always a miniature. It's always like trying to be a version of one of those exhibitions in some form or another. And I look a lot, or I'm drawn to like amateur craft, which is my heritage, and domestic things, souvenirs. And so I have a whole series of different sort of cloths that, for me, like you say, no one's going to use this as a handkerchief, so obviously it's a bit of it's stripping it of function and focusing on decoration and symbolism. But I am very interested in the kind of meaningful gap at the center, because to me there's kind of this, it's sort of a bit spiritual or mystical or something, but it also is the functional part. So when you think of pillowcases, and I grew up with these things that had, you know, the border would always be decorative, then there would be the space in the middle where you lay your head, or a placemat, and the cloth in Mollie's painting is actually like a placemat for a breakfast bowl, and there would be a decoration that would leave the gap in the middle where you put the bowl, and then the same with these, it's where you blow your nose, or you, so that's really big for me, the domestic. The objects downstairs are versions of home, basically, you know, sort of little houses in various different configurations. So everything I do now is kind of, focused on miniature, domestic. Whereas you are literally painting it.
Yeah, and I think we both kind of have a love of the domestic. And I think that there was, like, I can't quote it, but there was a line that I had said something about, what was it? It's a quote of mine, but you wrote it down. About when aging, what was it? My body was falling apart.
Oh, is this like the worry of, like, you worry about your mind falling apart up until a certain age, and then you start worrying about your body falling apart?
Yeah, it was like, finally I got my mind figured out, and now I worry about my body falling apart or something. It was like there's like this moment where you think everything's put together, and then all of a sudden your body starts going or something.
Yeah.
And like, I think in a way, in reference to like these domestic spaces that have kind of held me, I remember particularly like in your mom's painting downstairs for Deb. Like, I remember being in my body in that space and being like, the only like crappy thing in here is like what's inside this skin. And it was like, if I can just get out of my skin, like everything else in here is like warm and lovely. And like, so it was kind of like I wanted to like embed myself even more in those domestic spaces, because it was like, like if quantum physics could like work like really well, I could just like melt and like leave whatever was consuming me or something. So I still really, and in a way, like these, you know, it's like, which one would I crawl into the middle of, you know?
It's also, you know, I mean, it's also out of economic necessity. We don't have studios. We both work very much where we live.
Yeah.
And I feel like, you know, artist gets to a certain level and they feel like they have to compartmentalize. That there's a space that they go to and they be the artist. I think Mollie and I are both very interested in not being in that space. You know, what does the artist look like? What does the art look like if you do it, you know, in the toilet's probably a bad way.
But even, you know, Ursula K. Le Guin talked about it a lot. Olga Ravin is talking about it a lot now, this idea, well, they're talking about it kind of more in relation to motherhood, but this idea that art practice and the domestic must be segregated at all costs, otherwise it is not. It is not there's no integrity to the practice if it's occurring somehow alongside or enmeshed with the domestic. And like you say, it's just not the reality for many of us to have a designated working space.
It feels like a patriarchal.
Yes,
idea.
That and the assumption of the, I suppose, the privilege and the access and all of that as well. You talked a little bit there about the miniature, and I wanted to ask you about, so obviously in these pieces there's so much detail, and Mollie, in so many of your paintings we have this close detail, this sense of minutiae, and there's a compression of scale and perspective, I think, as well, that we're almost upon the scenes, you know, we're very much upon these scenes as we're observing the paintings. So I wonder if you would just talk a little bit about this idea of close detail or close looking or close labor when you're making. I suppose I'm thinking maybe in terms of kind of a certain type of atmosphere or a feeling of intimacy, maybe.
Yeah, like the word detail is something that I've always been like almost allergic to, because I feel like my work isn't detailed. Like I find it, like I feel like I'm more very concentrated. Like I can feel when I'm very concentrated and when things are working right. I was even telling Sara this morning that like my newest favorite painting tool is actually a Q-tip, or do you call them cotton buds? Yeah, cotton buds. And like I'm like scolding my husband now, like which ones he can and cannot use for the ears, because like there's particular ones, but it's like it's just like you have your favorite tools and your way of like working, and that kind of concentration of like knowing the way you work, but not necessarily that kind of precision that you would find in like those highly rendered paintings that are like where you would see every eyelash or something like that. Like I don't think I could make a painting like that. It would probably bore me in it, and therefore bore a viewer. And in a way, I kind of see that in your work. And like they have like, we've talked about the way that you see some of the fringes and things, but they're very considered.
Yeah.
You can see the care and love in them, but
But they're not
there's
perfectly symmetrical.
right, there's still like a rough something.
Yeah. I think for me, detail is it's kind of a way of dispelling from the fact that I don't have strong craft skills. So like downstairs, the sculptural pieces, I guess there's ways to make them, 3D printer, or cast them in molds, or maybe clay, but like what they actually are is modeling plaster that's been poured into sort of the plastic trays of vegetables after you, and then let it harden. Then I saw it up, then I carve it into little shapes with like carving knives, then I glue them all back together and paint them like 10 times in order to make them sort of solidify, which is like a stupid way to do it if you want to do it quickly. But what I get from them is I guess they look sort of unique, and I kind of feel like that kind of detail, it's like that attention to detail gives them a quality, or gives them like a little hum that they wouldn't have if I'd done them perhaps the way a skilled crafts person would have done. Like I graduated college in the sort of early noughties, and the emphasis when I was there, and maybe it was the college, I went to IIT Dundee, and it was a wonderful college, but the emphasis was kind of on new media and film. I don't know if it's still the case in art schools, but when I graduated, I felt like I had all these ideas and theories, and not a lot of actual practical skills. And so it seems completely logical to me that I became a writer who makes handicraft. So and then I guess the same with these. These were actually really influenced by an exhibition that was in Gallery 2 I was telling you about this yesterday, in the Douglas Hyde, I'd say around 2010, 2000. And they were Asafo Fante African flags, which are African tribe kind of in the middle of Ghana who make these flags to kind of represent their tribe. So they're still doing it, though it's kind of practice that's dying out, and it's very ceremonial now. And initially I worried about cultural appropriation, but actually these flags were kind of used, the material was often trade cloth, and they were kind of copying the sort of military banners that the English and European military were bringing in. And so I just remember being really struck by the flags. I mean, they're beautiful if anyone wants to look them up. There's lots of pictures. But they would be, sort of animals and bright colors, suns, trees, and I always wanted to do something in applique because I'd love these flags so much. And then when I went to do something, it was like, I'll make these really detailed pattern borders to make them my own in some way, but also as a way to compensate for the fact that, applique is very easy to do. It's not a skill. So for me, it's absolutely a way of covering my mistakes. Just make them so busy, no one will notice the errors.
Yeah, I wonder, how are we doing for time? Are we
2:30?
2:30? Okay, great. Well, I have another question, and then we might open it up to yourselves. So I've been thinking about when you said that you had spent a lot of time talking about spirituality and religion.
Woo-woo, as Mollie calls it.
Woo-woo. A good dose of woo-woo. And obviously the works are not overtly religious. And there's, it's not like there's a Bridget's cross in one of the paintings downstairs. So there are these little moments, these kind of syntactical moments. But there is, and then I was struck when you said that word home, because I have it in my notes that some of the work, the talismans, that the houses have this kind of the quiet hum of the sacred. And I was thinking, well, I suspect that that is a result of this close, almost ritualized process of, you know, a series of repeated gestures. And something that a series of repeated gestures that become increasingly charged every time they're repeated. And that is what constitutes a ritual, and that is what ultimately makes something sacred. So I wonder if you would talk a bit about secular approaches to the sacred, or where the spiritual shows up, or how you see it as useful or interesting, or...
Will I go with it? Will I open?
Open.
No, well, I do have a lot of ideas on this. I've had this weird year, and not everyone will know the reference, but I've been reading my contemporaries recently. And do you know, you will know, but Mary Costello, the writer Mary Costello, and also Rob Doyle, writer contemporaries who have books coming that it seems suddenly very concerned with religious matters. And I thought that's interesting, because maybe it's just the time of life, maybe it's not having kids. I get to a point and I'm, you know, really interested in, I guess, where we came from, consciousness. In my last novel, Seven Steeples, there was a lot, it was kind of like a Christian allegory that no one got.
No one ever gets the allegory. It's very frustrating.
And I thought, probably not cool to flag it as such. But it was very much about, you know, these little observances that we create for ourselves in the absence of organized religion. So, you know, in a secular setting, what do we do in order to ground ourselves, or and this is something Mollie and I talked about a lot, especially when she was not doing well, because, you know, we were always, and this comes naturally to you anyway, sort of pushing for rituals that could sustain us, you know. And so in my work, it's I'm always kind of thinking of Simone Weil, who said something. She's very big on like attention, and she says something like this, probably a misquote: "Absolutely unmixed attention is prayer." And she was a Christian mystic, or Catholic mystic, but I think, you know, I think it's very applicable to, you know, things that we do. I mean, mindfulness, you know, it's almost mainstream now. But I spent a year working on a different project that was kind of a response to a archaeology of a medieval site in Cork City. So anyway, I spent the year looking at an awful lot of medieval art, and I kind of latched onto this hand. So the pieces downstairs that I don't call them paintings, they're kind of like painted drawings, kind of repeat their sort of offcuts from that also relate to the handkerchiefs, but it's the repetition of this God hand, but it's also perhaps about me sort of grasping for something, you know, you know, the God hand that sort of repeats throughout medieval painting and like a lot of art, and the disembodied eye, obviously the third eye, and the fish and the mountains are all kind of, you know, religious references in a way without being overt. So yeah, it's something that comes round and round, and the process for me is very prayer-like. It's the closest thing that I have to prayer in a way, because I'm not actually, you know, practicing anything, and a way of searching, I guess. I feel like my mind, if I hadn't been making artwork a lot this year, my mind wouldn't have gone to those places, which is interesting, because I also spend a lot of time thinking, this is useless, I should be writing, but I guess it allows for my mind to go to places that you don't when you're thinking and reading and
I wrote a text for the show, and I think the first line was, a friend of mine once told me, you need a touchstone in your life, and I think a lot of people, a touchstone for them is religion, and I don't have organized religion, but I've leaned into meditation and things like that in my life, but painting has always been sort of that thing for me, and painting really is that thing that's grounding. And I think Sara and I, one of the things that has grounded our friendship, or has really brought us together, is our sense of appreciation for ritual and appreciation for sort of our normal everyday activities. And like, I love like the way I start every day with a morning run. That's like how I've started my day for pretty much 14, 15 years now. And that was part of what got me through the last while. And I think I remember this was part of back in North Dakota, like you sort of telling me these were the things in the kitchen, in the conversation with your mom as well. She was like, go for your run, like do these things, like that. For me, like that is the spiritual sense. Like those are those things where like you're putting your attention like very much like here and now, and that's also like what painting is. You know, I don't consider that to be like actual meditation because it's productive in another sense.
Yeah.
But it's that sense of that's religion to me. That's or a sense of purpose and a sense of stillness. And I think the older I get, and the after going through this, like having painting and like those sense of rituals, those daily rituals, and having like really strong relationships, like those things are kind of like, you know, the foundations now.
Yeah.
Truly.
Yeah. Okay.
This is gratuitous self-promotion, but another friend and I just made a radio program that will be broadcast around Christmas that is kind of about spiritual matters and art, I suppose. And that will be on Lyric FM at someone around the Christmas period. But we went to a monastery in Waterford and spent some time there. Nice. I don't know what it's going to sound like when it's done, but it was a really interesting trip.
Yeah, no, that'll be amazing, no doubt, yeah. Okay, questions from this lovely attentive audience?
Rather squished audience.
Alan, yeah?
Yeah. I know, I was just going to ask if Mollie's teeth are okay. Is that all resolved now, or is that ongoing?
That's in the sequel.
Yeah. Please God, no.
I have a question or observation. I think it's interesting how personal the work is and how that it's so brutally honest, and how do you ever feel like it is honest, I do believe you, but do you ever feel like you can that there's no reason why you've avoided a fictive version of it, where you can kind of maybe exaggerate, ameliorate, kind of just make something a little bit more dynamic. I mean, there's a beautiful banality, no offense intended, about a lot of the stuff in the work and the paintings. There's that kind of lovely naive style, which is that's also not something you would maybe say because you've described it differently. But there's a lovely way that you can kind of, that I think you've kind of surrounded yourself with these personal stories, which kind of protects you from a nasty criticality as well. You just sort of, I don't know if that's intentional or not. I'm kind of rambling now. Sort of, I was trying to not be mean, but it's like there's, how do you deal with mean people when the work is so personal?
When it has the potential to be exposing, or
they're kind of, if they don't like your work, it's like, well, they don't like you.
Oh, but that's
So
fine.
does it ever
No, that's fine. And that's, I think that's totally fine. And that's, I mean, it's sort of unfortunate then that I've made myself so vulnerable.
Yeah.
But like, I think that like, I have to be tough then, right? Like, and I think I don't have any other choice than like, I was just born to like make this kind of work, and I wouldn't want to make any other kind of work. And if someone doesn't like it and doesn't want to hear my story, like that's okay. And like, it's okay if they don't like the work. And like, if they want to be critical, like that's okay too. And I will take a bad review in the Irish Times. That'll be just fine.
I think what drew me to Mollie's work initially, like I saw her paintings without knowing anything about them. It was like actually without the story. Sometimes I find them more intriguing because, you know, we superimpose our own stories on them. And I think there's kind of an air of creepiness.
Yeah.
I don't know that Mollie always agrees. But it was that kind of oddness that felt like the darkness at the heart of every sort of human will that drew me to them. And I like that in this exhibition, I mean, you know, there was some conversation about it, but the texts are there to read if you choose to seek them out. But they're not next to the paintings on the wall either. So there's kind of, you can do what you want with them, you know. So I think they're hard. I would find them hard to criticize based on that
Also, when they're like a clear product of it, you know, I think you can always tell in a body of work if confessionalism has been the intention from the outset. I think that impulse towards confessionalism or a diaristic body of work can feel quite contrived, as opposed to it happening organically along the way. You know, that the experience or the content dictates a certain approach, and the two kind of commingle. Yeah.
There is like they don't feel contrived. I think.
Yeah.
Thank you.
But
But
there's also a generational confessional kind of attitude, which they kind of maybe accidentally or purposefully tap into in terms of our social media lives, and how there's a lot of gushing of personal experiences that are ultimately very ordinary, and then we want the world to, you know engage
about.
with or acknowledge our existence as a way of just, you know, being noticed and being alive.
Well, what's funny though is like I don't like reading memoirs. Do you know? Like and so in a way, and I guess I don't think about that, but like I wouldn't want to be painting my memoir. So I guess in a way I do want to be painting something that's a little more interesting than that. And I hope that's what I'm making.
But it does tap into a very particular visual style of kind of outsider naive painting that has that history, that trajectory of honesty,
Okay.
and being kind of embracing that kind of brutal honesty, and kind of, and you're not, like you say, not trying to be a hyper-realist painting.
Thank
That'd be
you.
Terrible, possibly. Awful. I mean, you don't get that same kind of feeling from that kind of work. It's so clinical. This is just more personal, because you've developed a very strong personal style and a way that, you know, not all artists do that, whatever, but it's just like there's it's you.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah, yourself there.
It doesn't really direct to what you were saying, but I guess it relates to the kind of two worlds that you occupy. So there was a Dublin review event that you were early in the week, Sarah, and afterwards a friend said to me, there's so much more ways for the world of literature to talk amongst itself and about itself than there was for the visual arts, particularly in Ireland. I mean, I could elaborate, but maybe that's enough. Do you have anything to say about that? Any thoughts on that, whether that's true or not?
Is this a veiled criticism of the art world?
Well, it was more that whether it was a criticism or not, it was more that the Dublin Review is a great example, but also you make, like in the Irish Times, as well as getting a review, you will have peers talking about each other's work, particularly literature. That happens a lot less in the arts and something like a national newspaper, in the visual arts, in a national newspaper. And I'm just wondering, have you noticed that? Do you think it's true, or any observations on that?
That's a question for Sue as well, I think.
Yeah.
We were talking about
No one's here to hear me talk. But
Yeah, I find them curious. I mean, it's weird for me because I started out in this world, the world of galleries and art, and then I achieved highly at something else, and so no one knows me as an artist or being in the arts so much. You know, I'm better known as a writer.
Yeah.
But I always have this, like, I'll always be a failed artist in my mind, rather than a successful writer. You know, but yeah, like Mollie and I have been talking about this week because you know that I slipped between two worlds just in the process of a week, and if anything, they don't perhaps talk to each other enough. Like Dublin's a small scene, and if I go to, like you'd say this as well, like I don't see the same people at exhibition openings that I do at book launches. Like they're totally.
and the energy is totally different often.
One.
Yeah, just one. And I mean, then there's theatre and there's music and there should probably be a bit more cross-pollination, but I think there is more now. Like I think, you know, we didn't have this concept of a multidisciplinary artist in times past, and now, but you know, it's hard to be multidisciplinary because we tend to think you can only be good at one thing, you know. The
Well, again,
market
that
likes to
idea of
put you in-
integrity, like if you're
if you're doing
multiple
then you're probably
things.
not trying hard enough at doing
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
What would the handkerchiefs be made of? Is that linen or cotton or a mixture of both? And where do you get your materials from?
That's an easy question. They're linen, and the cotton, the colours on them are cotton. And I get them in like handicraft shops, Vibes and Scribes. I don't know in Cork. I don't know if there's equivalent in Dublin.
Love vibes and scribes. Okay, maybe one more question, and then we'll
When you were talking about being in the moment, in psychology it's called the flow state.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering, when you're writing or when you're producing your art, is that the space you're in? That flow state where everything outside of your world is completely gone, if you know what I mean. I'm just very interested to know how you work. Is that the way you work? Or are you thinking all the time?
I wish I wrote about flow in my book Handiwork. I think in relation to people who make model railways. But I and also in relation to migrant birds, to animals. But I don't think, I think like a lot of people, my attention span is short and sort of scattered. So I will do this, and this is very boring, repetitive work, but I will be watching Netflix, you know. And writing is close, you get closer to flow almost with writing, because even though you're thinking all the time, your head is turning over. If you're thinking about perhaps in a clearer way or in a more direct way. Whereas I'm constantly listening to media as well, to podcasts, to radio. So do you have a better, less disappointing?
No, we're like the same. This is why we're like so close. It's so annoying. No, because I think flow, a lot of people say, oh, I got in the flow and 5 hours went by and it was amazing. I'm the opposite, where I think 5 hours went by and it was like 20 minutes. And I was like, oh, you know, and you're annoyed because you think and it's amazing because I'll get so much done. I'll just cruise through something, but then it'll be like my brain will be just fried for 3 hours because it's almost so much concentration and energy went into this particular thing. And I think sometimes in a way that I don't know, I really love, if you've probably noticed, there's a lot of wood paneling in some of my work, and the way that I can make the wood get wood and it's getting that kind of concentration is probably flow, and that happens quickly, but that sort of takes it out of me. And that happens, but then you get exhausted.
But again, these ideas of what intellectual pursuit looks like, you know, these norms we've inherited of the master in the studio and all things, nothing else matters. I remember I was on a residency in New Hampshire, and there was an artist who used to just eat spoonfuls of peanut butter just to keep her calorie count up, you know, because she was working so hard. I was like, Jesus, I'm never not thinking about coffee. We might have time for one last.
Okay, so I was just interested. So you mentioned kind of the role of or the idea of ritual and spirituality in the making of the work, and I was thinking about the idea of the song lines. You know, in the way First Nations people often mapped ground and territory by song and stories, and this was kind of their way of, I suppose, passing on maps to people, so it had a function but also kind of a spiritual level. And I wonder, in a way, is it sort of like map making, that there's some, in the process of making the work, it has a communicative function, and there are images on a surface level, but on another level there's sort of maps in a way. There's a narrative beneath them, for you personally, in the work.
Well, what springs into my mind, and it mightn't be exactly answering your question, but I do think of this idea of sort of ancestral heritage, and the handkerchiefs in particular is sort of a connection to my maternal line, and to my grandmother, because all of my sewing equipment came from her. She died of COVID in 2020, and she was a very working class north of England woman, but she made this absolutely beautiful handicraft all of her life, much of it textiles. And for me, it's a little bit like I'm talking to her, you know, when I'm doing it. I think she'd love the stuff I make now. I'm kind of sad she's not there to see it. So yeah, for me, there's some kind of I also think a lot about, inheritance, about the heritage of why am I doing this now, and what tradition am I attached to? And that's why I've kind of gravitated towards amateur craft, which is, you know, totally denigrated in the art world. But to me, it's actually my family origins.
I think a lot of people do inherit their parents or their grandparents' sewing kits.
I'm
It's
sure,
really
yeah.
interesting,
Yeah, and I think in previous bodies of work, and like there's little hints that I don't need to go into in this work, and it comes up a little bit in the book actually.
Yes,
Quite a bit. Grandmothers come up in the book. This sort of passing down of history and the passing down of these stories. It is the storylines for sure.
Okay. All right, well, we're going to finish there. Thank you all so much. Thank you. Big clap for Sara and Mollie.